Oscar stepped onto the porch and tilted his head toward the wide blue sky. Patches of soft white clouds drifted lazily above, glowing in the morning light. He squinted for a moment, wondering if rain might come later. But the air smelled dry, and the clouds looked gentle and harmless. That meant one thing. Today was going to be perfect for exploring. He grinned. If there was one thing Oscar loved more than anything, it was a day spent discovering new things outdoors. He could spend hours looking for bugs under rocks, studying tree bark, or collecting shiny stones. But there was a rule in his house. No nature walks if it was going to rain. His mom didn't like muddy trails or slippery paths, and Oscar couldn't blame her. Well, not much. Still, it looked like luck was on his side. He ran back to his room, his mind buzzing with ideas about what he might find today. The first thing he reached for was hanging on the back of his chair, his Junior Ranger Explorer vest. It was olive green with sturdy fabric and so many pockets that he'd lost count. Each one had a purpose. One for stones, one for tools, one for snacks, and one for just in case things, as he liked to call them. He slipped his arms through the holes, tugged it straight, and zipped it up proudly. The sound of the zipper made him feel official, like a real explorer preparing for a mission. Next, Oscar opened the small wooden box on his dresser and took out a shiny silver compass. It had been his birthday present last spring, and he loved how the tiny needle inside always knew where north was, even when he didn't. He clipped it carefully onto his vest, just beside the biggest pocket. Then came his binoculars. They hung from a string in his closet, right next to his winter scarf. Oscar lifted them down and looped them around his neck. The lenses glinted in the morning light. With these, he could spot a bird far up in the sky or a rabbit hiding at the edge of the meadow. He tested them once, pretending to scan for danger. The blurry shape of his desk became huge and funny looking through the glass. He laughed, but an explorer never left unprepared. He grabbed his magnifying glass from the shelf. It was heavy with a thick handle and a big round lens that made things look giant. He slipped it into one of his vest pockets. Then he took 3 small plastic specimen boxes from his desk drawer. Each had a magnified lid that made it easy to study small treasures. He'd used them before for feathers, interesting pebbles, and even a tiny snail shell once. He stacked them neatly in another pocket. From the top drawer, he pulled out a small rope and a bit of string, because as Oscar always said, you never knew when you might need to tie something up or pull something down. Finally, he took a slim-natured guidebook from his shelf. Its pages were filled with colorful drawings of insects, plants, and animals that lived near his neighborhood. He flipped through a few pages, admiring the bright green beetles and the spotted frogs, before sliding the book into his back pocket. He stood for a moment in front of his mirror. His reflection smiled back at him, a real explorer ready for adventure. Perfect, he whispered. Oscar's heart thumped with excitement as he stepped out of his room. He could already imagine the sound of rustling leaves, the smell of pine needles, and the thrill of spotting something new. He headed to the living room to find his mom. She was sitting by the window, reading, but when she looked up and saw him in his vest with all his gear, her eyes sparkled. "Well," she said with a smile, "someone's ready for an expedition." Oscar nodded eagerly. Can we go today, Mom? Please. His mother laughed softly and stood up. Of course. I'll pack some snacks and water. Oscar couldn't believe his luck. Today was really happening. He waited by the door while she filled a small backpack with sandwiches, apples, and 2 bottles of water. She handed him a floppy explorer's hat, one he often forgot to wear. Can't have the sun burning that nose of yours, she teased. Oscar grinned and put it on. He felt unstoppable. And with that, they stepped outside, 2 explorers ready for the unknown. But Oscar didn't realize that today's adventure would bring more than just tadpoles and rocks. There was something waiting for him in the woods, something that would change the way he looked at exploring forever. As they started down the trail toward the woods, Oscar had no idea what hidden discovery was waiting just beyond the trees. The sun felt warm on Oscar's shoulders as he and his mother set out toward the small woods near their neighborhood. The trail began just beyond the park, where the pavement ended and the earth turned to soft, dusty brown. Oscar could hardly stay still. Every few steps, he tugged at his binoculars or checked the compass clipped to his vest, pretending he was leading a grand expedition through an untamed land. His mother followed a few paces behind, smiling at his energy. The entrance to the woods was marked by 2 old oak trees that leaned toward each other like friendly giants. As soon as they passed between them, the sounds of the neighborhood faded away. The hum of cars, the barking of dogs, even the distant laughter of kids at the park. It all softened into the background until only the whispers of the forest remained. Leaves rustled gently overhead. A bird called somewhere high in the branches. Oscar inhaled deeply. The air smelled of pine, earth, and something crisp that made him feel wide awake. He stopped and looked around, letting his eyes adjust to the dim, speckled light beneath the trees. It's like another world in here, he said quietly. His mother nodded. That's because it is. Every forest has its own rhythm, its own secrets. Oscar liked that idea, a forest with secrets. They followed the winding dirt path deeper into the trees. The sunlight trickled through the branches like golden dust. Ferns unfurled by the path, and roots crisscrossed the trail like ropes. Oscar carefully stepped over them, pretending he was crossing a jungle. Before long, he spotted movement. A gray squirrel was perched on a low branch, tail flicking like a feather duster. It froze when it noticed them. Oscar held his breath and whispered, "Look, Mom." The squirrel stared back with its dark, curious eyes. Then, in a flash, it darted up the trunk and disappeared into the canopy. Oscar giggled. He was guarding his acorns, I bet. Probably, his mother said. Or maybe. A little farther on, Oscar knelt by the side of the trail. There, half hidden by fallen leaves, was a small hole in the ground. He brushed the dirt gently away with his fingers. The hole went deeper than he expected, maybe the home of a rabbit or a chipmunk. He reached into one of his vest pockets and took out his magnifying glass. The circular lens caught the light as he leaned close. "I think something lives here," he murmured, studying tiny tracks pressed in the soil. "Then we shouldn't disturb it," his mom said softly. "Explorers observe, but they don't interfere." Oscar nodded seriously. That was one of the golden rules of exploring. They moved on, their footsteps crunching softly on the forest floor. The deeper they went, the quieter the woods became. It was the kind of quiet that wasn't empty, but full, alive with faint sounds if you listen hard enough. The buzz of an insect, the rustle of a bird landing, the drip of water from a leaf. After a while, the trees opened up just enough for sunlight to spill onto a nearby clearing. Oscar looked up and gasped. High above, in the branches of a tall birch tree, was a nest. It was woven tightly with twigs and bits of grass, tucked neatly into the crook of two branches. "Mom, look," he whispered excitedly. She followed his gaze and smiled. "That's a bird's nest, all right. Probably made by a robin or a sparrow. Do you think there are eggs in it? Maybe not yet. But if we come back in a week or two, we might see baby birds." Oscar's eyes widened. "We have to come back." They stood for a while watching the nest sway gently in the breeze, a quiet moment shared between explorer and teacher. Then, at last, they turned back to the path. As they walked, the forest began to thin. Shafts of sunlight appeared ahead, hinting at open space beyond the trees. Oscar could feel the excitement building again. "The hill's coming up," his mom said, smiling at his eager steps. He quickened his pace, binoculars bouncing against his chest. Whatever lay beyond the trees was calling to him. Something bright, something new. But what Oscar would find at the top of the hill wasn't just sunlight. It was the first true discovery of his day. Oscar pushed ahead eagerly as the path began to slope upward. The sunlight, once broken by the trees, now poured down in warm, golden waves. His boots crunched over gravel and dried leaves. The forest behind him grew quieter, replaced by the gentle hum of open air. By the time they reached the base of the hill, Oscar could see the sky stretching wide and endless above the treetops. The slope wasn't steep, but it rose steadily, covered in soft grass that swayed in the wind. From up there, his mom had told him, you could see all the way to the pond at the edge of the woods. "Race you to the top," he shouted suddenly, unable to resist. Before his mother could answer, he was off, charging up the hill with his vest jingling and his hat tilted crookedly. His gear clanked against his chest in a rhythm that made him feel like a real explorer on a grand adventure. The higher he went, the brighter the sunlight became. He could feel it warming the back of his neck and glinting off the metal clip of his compass. By the time he reached the top, he was out of breath, but grinning ear to ear. He turned around to watch his mom walking up behind him, laughing as she caught up. "You win," she said, shaking her head. Oscar laughed and planted his hands on his hips. From where he stood, the world seemed enormous. The trees spread out below like a green ocean, rippling softly in the wind. Beyond that, The rooftops of their neighborhood peeked out, and far in the distance, he could see the faint shimmer of the pond. But what caught his attention most was the sky. It was so big, so blue, that it almost didn't look real. And soaring through that blue was a single dark shape. Oscar shaded his eyes. "Mom, look!" She followed his gaze. "Ah, a hawk," she said quietly. "See how it glides without flapping its wings much? That's how you can tell." Oscar quickly grabbed his binoculars and lifted them to his eyes. The world shifted into focus, and suddenly the bird seemed close enough to touch. He could see the curve of its wings, each feather catching the sunlight. Its tail spread like a fan, steering it through invisible air currents. "Whoa," he whispered. "It's huge." His mother smiled. "They always look small from far away, but up close they're magnificent." Oscar tracked the hawk as it circled lazily, riding the wind above the valley. For a moment, he felt like he was flying too, floating high above the trees with the bird. After a while, he lowered the binoculars and handed them to his mom. "You have to see it," he said. She looked through the lenses, nodding softly. "Beautiful," she murmured. They stood together in silence, watching the hawk drift farther until it was just a dark speck against the sky. Then, just as Oscar turned to continue down the other side of the hill, something caught his eye, a sudden flash of light near his feet. He stopped. "Wait!" The light flashed again, small but bright, like a star buried in the grass. He knelt down and brushed away a few blades. There, half hidden in the dirt, was a small stone. One side looked ordinary, gray and rough, but the other side sparkled white where it had caught the sunlight. He picked it up carefully, turning it in his hand. "Mom, look what I found." She crouched beside him. "That's quartz," she said with a smile. "You've got a good eye, explorer." Oscar's grin widened. Quartz. He remembered seeing a picture of it in his guidebook, labeled rare and beautiful. He opened one of his specimen boxes, gently placed the stone inside, and snapped the lid shut. "There," he said proudly. "First discovery of the day." His mother nodded. "And probably not the last." Oscar slipped the box into his pocket, feeling a thrill run through him. He couldn't wait to find what else was waiting beyond the hill. The path ahead curved down toward a patch of green, where tall reeds waved in the wind. If he listened closely, he thought he could already hear the faint croak of frogs. He smiled and started down the slope, the quartz stone glinting in his pocket. But what Oscar didn't know yet was that the next stop on his adventure, the quiet little pond, was hiding its own set of surprises. As Oscar and his mother made their way down the hill, the air grew cooler again. A soft breeze carried the smell of damp grass and wildflowers. The trail curved gently through the open field before dipping into a patch of tall, whispering reeds. Oscar could hear the faint croak of frogs somewhere up ahead. He smiled. He knew they were close. The reeds swayed like green curtains as they approached. Tiny dragonflies darted around them. their wings shimmering blue and gold in the sunlight. Somewhere beneath the buzz of insects, Oscar could hear the slow trickle of water. "There it is," he said excitedly, pointing ahead. The pond lay just beyond the reeds, calm and round, its surface glinting like glass. A few lily pads floated lazily on top, and every now and then a ripple spread out where something small had jumped into the water. Oscar knelt by the edge of the pond, peering down. His reflection wavered in the clear water. A boy in a floppy hat, eyes wide with wonder. His mother stood behind him, smiling softly. "Careful not to slip, explorer," she warned. "I won't," he said, though he leaned forward a little more anyway. He loved watching the pond. It always seemed alive, like it had its own quiet heartbeat. Something moved just beneath the surface. Tiny, wiggling shapes darted through the water. At first, Oscar thought they were fish, but then he remembered something from his guidebook. "Tadpoles," he exclaimed. He reached into his vest and pulled out his magnifying glass. Holding it just above the water, he watched the little creatures more closely. They swam with quick, jerky movements, their round heads and swishing tails glinting in the sunlight. "They look like fish," Oscar said, "but they're not, right?" His mother crouched beside him. "That's right. They're baby frogs. When they grow older, they'll start to sprout legs and lose their tails." Oscar's eyes lit up. "That's amazing." He watched them for a while, completely absorbed. A small snail crept slowly along the muddy edge, and a water beetle zipped by, leaving tiny ripples behind. Every inch of the pond seemed to have something happening if you looked closely enough. Oscar opened one of his specimen boxes and dipped it gently into the shallow water, scooping up a bit of mud and a small pebble. He studied it carefully through the magnifying lid. "There's so much life here," he whispered. His mom nodded. "That's the magic of nature. There's always more than what you first see." After a while, she reached into her backpack. "I brought something special today," she said, pulling out a small glass jar. Oscar's eyebrows lifted. "What's that for?" She handed it to him with a smile. "For collecting a few tadpoles. You can take them home and watch them grow. When they turn into frogs, we'll bring them back here and let them go." Oscar gasped in delight. "Really? You mean we can keep them for a while?" "For a little while," she said gently. "You'll have to take good care of them. Explorers respect what they find." He nodded eagerly. "I will, I promise." Oscar opened the jar and dipped it carefully into the water. Bubbles rose to the surface as he tilted it. When he lifted it out, the water inside shimmered with movement. 3 tiny tadpoles swam in circles, their little tails flicking rapidly. "I did it," he shouted. "Look, Mom, 3 of them. 3 perfect little tadpoles," she said proudly. "You'll have to name them." Oscar grinned as he twisted the lid back on. He thought for a moment, tapping the glass gently. "This one's Biggie," he said, pointing to the largest. "That one's Smally, and that tiny one there, that's Froggy." His mom laughed. Froggy, huh? Even though he's not a frog yet. Oscar chuckled. Not yet, but he will be. He held the jar up to the sunlight, watching the tadpoles glide gracefully through the clear water. He could already imagine their journey, how they would change, grow legs, and someday leap right back into this pond. He smiled to himself, feeling proud and peaceful. The day had been everything he hoped for. But as he stood up, something rustled in the reeds behind them, a sound that didn't belong to the frogs or the wind. Oscar turned his head sharply. Did you hear that, Mom? She frowned slightly, listening. The sound came again, a soft crack like a twig snapping. Was it another explorer or was something else watching them from the edge of the pond? Oscar froze, his heart thudding quietly against his ribs. The sound had come from somewhere just beyond the tall reeds. A faint rustle, then a crack like a small branch breaking. He glanced up at his mother. Do you think it's an animal? He whispered. Maybe, she said softly. Let's stay still and see. They both crouched low beside the pond, the reeds swaying gently in the breeze. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Only the croak of frogs and the faint hum of insects filled the air. Then, suddenly, the reeds shivered again, this time much closer. Oscar held his breath. Out stepped a small brown rabbit. Its fur was soft and dusty looking, its ears tall and twitching. It paused when it saw them, eyes wide and shiny like marbles. Oscar exhaled in relief and smiled. A rabbit. I thought it was something scary. His mother laughed quietly. The forest doesn't usually have scary things, Oscar. Just curious ones. The rabbit sniffed the air, then hopped forward a few steps. Its nose twitched rapidly as it looked at the jar in Oscar's hands. Maybe he's curious about the tadpoles, Oscar said. Or maybe he's hoping you brought some carrots, his mom teased. They both giggled softly. The rabbit's ears flicked once more, and then, just as quietly as it had appeared, it turned and darted back into the reeds. The sound of its tiny hops faded into the distance. Oscar grinned. That was so cool. I wish I had my camera. You've got something better, his mom said. You've got your eyes and your memory. Those never run out of batteries. Oscar nodded thoughtfully. He liked that idea. They sat by the pond for a little while longer, enjoying the soft sounds around them. The frogs croaking, the wind rippling the surface of the water, the hum of dragonflies hovering nearby. Oscar opened his notebook and made a quick sketch of the tadpoles, labeling them with their names. Biggie, Smally, Froggy. When he was done, he added a small drawing of the rabbit, its ears perked up. His mom peeked over his shoulder. You're getting better at drawing, she said proudly. He smiled shyly. Maybe I'll make a book one day. The Adventures of Oscar the Explorer. I'd read that, she said. Every page. The afternoon light grew softer, turning the pond golden. Oscar stood up and stretched, slipping the notebook back into his vest. We should probably head home soon, his mom said. Your new friends will need a proper tank to live in. Oscar nodded, but lingered for a moment, looking out over the pond. He felt a kind of quiet happiness, a feeling that he'd discovered something special, not just about nature, but about himself too. He took one last look at the reeds, half hoping the rabbit might come back for a final goodbye. Instead, the wind whispered through them, making the tall grasses bow and sway. "Goodbye, pond," Oscar said softly. "See you soon." As they began walking back up the path, the forest seemed to hum with life around them. The air smelled of earth and sunlight, and the leaves above fluttered like green confetti. Oscar's boots left small prints in the dirt, right beside his mother's. He looked down at the jar, swinging gently in his hand. Inside, the 3 tadpoles darted around, tiny tails flicking. "Don't worry," he whispered to them. "We're going to make you a new home." His mom glanced over, smiling at his quiet promise. Halfway up the hill, they paused for a drink of water. From there, Oscar could see the sun dipping lower behind the trees. The sky was streaked with orange and pink, and the air had that cool, sleepy feeling that comes near the end of a perfect day. Still, something about the pond stayed in Oscar's mind. The rustle of reeds, the flicker of light on the water, the sense that there was more to find, something just beyond what he could see. He didn't know why, but he had a feeling that this wasn't the last time he'd come here. And he was right, because by the next afternoon, Oscar's adventure would take a surprising turn, one that began right inside his own home. That night, as Oscar drifted off to sleep, he didn't realize the biggest mystery of his adventure was only just beginning. By the time Oscar and his mother reached home, the sky was glowing orange and violet. The sun had slipped low, and a faint evening breeze rustled through the trees. Their shoes were dusty, their faces warm from the walk, but both were smiling. Oscar set his jar of tadpoles carefully on the kitchen table as if it were made of gold. Inside, Biggie, Smalley, and Froggy swam in slow circles, their little tails glinting in the light from the window. "They made it," Oscar said proudly. His mother filled a bowl with cool water from the tap and added a few smooth pebbles from the garden. "We'll set up a small home for them tonight," she said. "Tomorrow, we can look for a real tank." Oscar nodded eagerly. He leaned down to study his new pets. The tadpoles were tiny but full of life, flicking through the water like living commas. "Do they sleep?" he asked curiously. His mom smiled. "Not quite the way we do. They rest sometimes, but they're mostly busy little swimmers." After dinner, they arranged the bowl on Oscar's desk near the window. His mother helped him add a few water plants for the tadpoles to hide under. The soft green leaves floated lazily across the surface, and the little creatures darted between them like shadows. "There," his mom said, brushing her hands together. "A perfect temporary home." Oscar leaned on his elbows, staring into the bowl. "It's like my own tiny pond." His mother nodded. "Exactly. And now you get to watch what happens next." He could hardly wait. Before bed, Oscar made sure the tadpoles were safe. He even whispered to them, "Good night, Biggie. Good night, Smalley." "Good night, Froggy." Then he climbed under his blanket, his explorer's hat hanging on the bedpost beside him. The house grew quiet. Crickets chirped outside his window, and the faint glow of the moon shone across his room. He felt sleepy but peaceful. His mind replayed the day, finding the quartz, seeing the hawk, discovering the tadpoles. It was the best adventure he'd had in weeks. As his eyes drifted closed, something magical happened. He dreamed he was back at the pond, but this time it looked different. The moon floated high above, silver and full, lighting up the water like glass. The reeds swayed in slow motion, whispering secrets to the night air. Oscar crouched by the edge and saw tiny ripples forming where the moonlight touched the surface. He leaned closer. The tadpoles were there, Biggie, Smally, and Froggy. Except they weren't ordinary anymore. They shimmered faintly, glowing blue under the moonlight. "Hello, Oscar," said a voice, not scary or strange, but soft and musical, like wind through leaves. Oscar blinked. Who said that? The ripples grew wider, and from the center of the pond, a gentle shape began to rise, a small frog with bright, glowing eyes. Its body sparkled like starlight. "I did," said the frog with a smile. "We wanted to thank you for bringing us home." Oscar's mouth fell open. "You can talk." "In dreams, yes," the frog replied. "You listened to the pond, Oscar. You cared. That's what explorers do." Oscar smiled uncertainly. "Will you really turn into frog soon?" The glowing frog nodded. "Change comes to all of us. Tadpoles, frogs, even explorers." Then the frog gave a soft croak, and the pond rippled again. Oscar tried to ask more, but the dream began to fade like mist. The reeds shimmered, the moon dimmed, and the last thing he saw was the glowing frog leaping into the water, leaving a ring of light behind. When he woke up the next morning, the sunlight was streaming across his pillow. For a moment, he lay still, remembering the dream. It had felt real, the light, the voice, even the warm air around the pond. He turned to his desk. The bowl sat quietly in the sunbeam. The tadpoles were swimming slowly, just as they had the night before. Nothing magical seemed to be happening, but Oscar couldn't shake the feeling that the dream meant something. He leaned closer to the bowl and whispered, "Morning, Biggie. Morning, Smally. Morning, Froggy." One of the tadpoles wiggled extra fast, as if waving hello. Oscar smiled. "I think we got a big day ahead." Oscar didn't realize it yet, but that day would bring the first real change in his tiny pond, and the start of something extraordinary. The next morning felt full of promise. Sunlight filtered through Oscar's curtains, painting stripes of gold across his room. Birds chirped outside, and the faint smell of toast drifted in from the kitchen. But before anything else, Oscar went straight to the bowl on his desk. "Good morning, explorers," he whispered to his tadpoles. Biggie, Smally, and Froggy swam in small, lazy circles, flicking their tails through the clear water. Oscar watched them closely, his chin resting on his folded arms. Everything looked peaceful, but something seemed different. He leaned closer, squinting. That's when he saw it. "Mom," he shouted, "come quick." His mother hurried in, wiping her hands on a towel. "What is it? What's wrong?" Oscar pointed excitedly. "Look, I think Biggie's changing." She bent over the bowl. Sure enough, one of the tadpoles had the faintest little bump where its tail met its body. It wasn't much, just a tiny curve like the beginning of a new limb. "Well, would you look at that?" she said softly. "You're right. He started to grow legs." Oscar's face lit up. "It's happening, just like the book said." He grabbed his notebook and flipped it open to a fresh page. With careful strokes, he sketched Biggie in the bowl, labeling the little bump first leg. He even drew arrows pointing to the other two tadpoles, writing "soon to follow." His mother smiled at the drawing. "Looks like your experiment is working perfectly." Oscar nodded proudly. "They're not just tadpoles anymore. They're becoming frogs." After breakfast, they decided to make the tadpoles' home a bit more comfortable. They found an old glass tank in the garage, one that used to hold seashells from a beach trip. His mom helped him clean it thoroughly, then fill it with water, smooth stones, and a few water plants. When it was ready, Oscar transferred the tadpoles one by one, using a small cup so they wouldn't get hurt. He moved slowly, carefully, like a scientist performing an important experiment. "There you go, Biggie," he whispered as he lowered the first one in. "Your new home." The tadpoles explored the tank immediately, weaving through the plants and resting on the stones. Oscar sat back, admiring their little world. "It's like a tiny underwater forest," he said. His mother nodded. "You need to feed them properly now. Boiled spinach or lettuce, something gentle for their little bellies." Oscar grinned. "Got it. Frog food coming right up." All afternoon, he kept checking on them. Every hour, he noticed some small change, a tiny twitch, a new movement, a speck of growth where there hadn't been before. He drew each one carefully in his notebook, labeling the dates and times. By evening, the sunlight had turned golden again. Oscar sat at his desk, the tank glowing softly beside him. He opened his guidebook to the page on amphibians and read aloud. "When a tadpole begins to grow legs, it starts preparing for life both in water and on land." Oscar looked at Biggie, who now had two tiny stubs where back legs would soon grow. "You're gonna hop soon, little buddy," he said proudly. His mother peeked in through the doorway. "Dinner's ready, scientist," she said with a grin. "Coming," he answered. But before he left, he turned back to the tank once more. The tadpoles were still moving slowly, gracefully. He thought about his dream the night before. The glowing frog, the moonlit pond, the words, "Change comes to all of us." He felt a strange tingle of excitement. Maybe the dream hadn't just been a dream. Maybe it was something more, something real. That night, after dinner, he checked on his tiny friends one last time. The house was quiet. The tadpoles swam softly through the shadows of the tank, their little bodies glowing faintly in the lamp's warm light. He pressed his hand gently against the glass, as if to say good night again. "Keep growing," he whispered. "I'll be right here." The tadpoles flicked their tails in reply, tiny silhouettes dancing in the water. Oscar climbed into bed, his mind filled with questions and wonder. What would they look like tomorrow? How fast would they change? And what if they could talk again, like in his dream? He smiled at the thought, pulling his blanket up to his chin. The next morning would bring not only new changes in the tank, but also a mysterious clue that would lead Oscar back to the woods. Oscar woke early the next morning, sunlight spilling across his face. The first thing he saw was the glass tank on his desk, glinting faintly in the golden light. He sat up quickly, his heart racing with excitement. He swung his legs out of bed, hurried to the desk, and leaned over the tank. Biggie, Smiley, and Froggy were swimming lazily near the bottom, but something had definitely changed overnight. Oscar's eyes widened. Whoa! Biggie now had two tiny back legs, each one as delicate as a thread. They moved gently in the water as the little tadpole wiggled its tail. Smiley's legs were just starting to appear, while Froggy, smallest of all, still looked much the same. "You're growing fast," Oscar whispered, grinning. "At this rate, you'll be hopping in no time." He carefully made a note in his journal. Day 3, Biggie has legs. Then he sketched another picture, labeling each tadpole. His handwriting was messy from excitement, but he didn't care. His mother peeked through the door, already smiling. "Let me guess, you couldn't wait to check on them?" Oscar laughed. "You know me too well." She stepped inside and looked over his shoulder. "Wow, they really are growing quickly. Looks like someone's doing a great job as caretaker." Oscar puffed out his chest proudly. "I feed them every day. I even talk to them. Maybe they grow faster because they know they're loved." His mother chuckled. "Maybe so." After breakfast, Oscar helped with a few chores, but his mind kept wandering back to the tank. When he finally went to check on the tadpoles again, something strange caught his attention. A thin, silvery feather was lying on the windowsill just above the tank. He blinked. That's odd. It wasn't one of the small, fluffy feathers you found around the yard. This one was long and narrow, shimmering faintly in the sunlight, almost like it was glowing. He picked it up carefully. It felt soft but strong, and when he tilted it, colors rippled faintly across the surface, silver, blue, and green, like sunlight on water. Oscar frowned. Where did this come from? He checked the window. It was closed tight. No bird could have flown in. He looked around his room. No sign of a pillow tear or stray feather anywhere. "Mom," he called, holding up the feather as she walked by in the hallway. "Do you know what kind of bird this is from?" She came over, squinting at it. I've never seen a feather quite like that before. Maybe from a jay or a dove, though it's brighter than any I've seen." Oscar turned it over in his hand again. It shimmered faintly. "It's kind of magical," he murmured. His mother smiled. "Maybe it's your explorer's luck." But Oscar wasn't sure. Something about it felt familiar, though he couldn't say why. Then he remembered his dream, the glowing frog, the blue light on the pond, the soft voice that had said his name. Could it be connected? That afternoon, he decided to investigate. He slipped the feather into one of the small clear boxes on his vest, the same way he'd stored the quartz stone from the hill. Then he clipped the box safely shut and tucked it into his pocket. When he told his mom he wanted to visit the woods again, she didn't hesitate. "You can't stay away, can you?" she teased, packing them both a quick snack. "Explorers have to follow clues," Oscar said seriously, his eyes sparkling. Soon they were walking down the familiar path, the air cooler under the trees. The forest felt alive again. The whisper of leaves, the hum of insects, the smell of pine and earth. But today, something about it felt expectant, like it was waiting for him. As they passed the hill, Oscar glanced up at the sky. A shadow drifted high above, broad wings gliding on the wind. "The hawk," he shouted. "He's back." His mom shielded her eyes. "You're right. Maybe you dropped your feather." Oscar nodded, but deep down he wasn't sure. The feather didn't look like a hawk's. It looked like it belonged to something rarer, something he hadn't yet discovered. When they reached the pond again, the reeds swayed softly, just as before. The water shimmered in the sunlight. Oscar knelt at the edge, peering down. He pulled the feather out of its box and held it above the surface. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the faintest ripple spread across the water, even though the air was still. The feather's silver edge caught the light and glowed pale blue, just for a second, like a wink from the pond. Oscar's breath caught in his throat. "Mom, did you see that?" She looked up from her bag. "See what?" "The feather. It glowed," he said, holding it up again. But now it looked normal, just a soft, shiny feather. His mother smiled kindly. Maybe it was just the sunlight, sweetheart. Oscar wanted to believe that, but deep down he knew it wasn't just light. Something about this feather was connected to his dream, and the pond knew it too. He tucked the feather away, a quiet determination growing inside him. He didn't know it yet, but the mysterious feather was only the beginning. The pond and the forest had much more to show him. That night, when the moon rose again, Oscar would discover just how powerful a single feather could be. That night, the moon rose full and bright, spilling silver light across Oscar's room. The world outside his window seemed calm and dreamlike. Quiet houses, dark trees, and the faint hum of crickets in the grass. Oscar lay in bed, wide awake. He couldn't stop thinking about the feather. It sat in its little clear box on his desk, glinting faintly under the moonlight. Every time he looked at it, the same strange feeling returned. The memory of the glowing frog, the rippling pond, and that mysterious voice whispering his name. He turned over, pulling the blanket to his chin. Just a feather, he whispered to himself. Just a feather. But deep down, he didn't believe it. The moonlight shifted slightly, falling across the tank beside the feather. The water shimmered like glass, and Oscar noticed the tadpoles stirring. Biggie was resting on a stone now, his new legs tucked beneath him, his tail shorter than before. Smiley had 2 tiny limbs as well, and even Froggy looked plumper, his tail flicking gently. "Good work, team," Oscar murmured. "You're changing fast." He sat up, drawn toward the feather again. The silver strand seemed almost alive, glowing softly in the moonlight. For a moment, it looked like it was moving. No, breathing, its edges fluttering without wind. Oscar blinked. That can't be. He got out of bed, his bare feet silent on the floor, and walked slowly to his desk. The feather shimmered brighter now, pale blue light pulsing from its spine. The tadpole's water rippled slightly, as if stirred by an invisible hand. Oscar's breath quickened. He glanced toward the window. The moonlight poured in, soft and steady. "What's happening?" he whispered. The feather lifted, just a little, floating barely above the glass box, spinning slowly in the air like a leaf caught in a breeze. Oscar's eyes widened. "Oh, wow." He reached out, hesitating for a second, then held out his hand beneath it. The feather drifted down, landing lightly in his palm. It was warm, not hot, not cold, just alive. And then, faintly, he heard it. A voice, soft and musical, carried on the still air. Oscar the Explorer. It whispered, "The pond remembers you." Oscar's heart raced. Who are you?" he asked softly, though his voice trembled. The light from the feather flickered, and for a moment, the room changed. The walls faded away, replaced by the soft shimmer of moonlit water. He was standing at the edge of the pond again, but it wasn't a dream this time. He could feel the cool air on his skin, smell the damp earth, hear the frogs singing in the reeds. The surface of the pond glowed like silver glass. From its center, a small ripple spread outward. Then, rising slowly from the water, came the same glowing frog from his dream. Its eyes sparkled like tiny lanterns. "You came back," it said in its gentle voice. Oscar swallowed hard. I didn't mean to. I was in my room." "You followed the sign," said the frog, nodding toward the feather. "It brought you here. The pond has chosen you again." Oscar looked down at the feather glowing in his hand. "Chosen me? For what?" The frog's reflection shimmered across the water. "Every explorer has 2 kinds of journeys," it said. "One to discover the world outside, and one to understand the magic inside." Oscar frowned slightly, trying to understand. "Magic inside?" The frog smiled. "The kind that helps you see what others miss. The kind that listens to the quiet." Oscar looked around at the shining reeds, the rippling pond, the starlit sky. Everything felt alive, humming softly like music. The frog continued. "The feather belongs to a messenger, one who watches over explorers. It appears only when the forest has something to teach. Oscar's grip tightened on the feather. What does it want to teach me? The frog's smile deepened. Patience, wonder, and how to see beyond what's ordinary. Before Oscar could reply, the feather shimmered brighter and brighter until it filled the clearing with light. He had to squint against the glow. When it faded, the frog was gone, and he was standing in his room again, the night air cool and still. The feather lay quiet in his hand, no longer glowing. The tadpoles swam calmly in their tank, as if nothing had happened. Oscar sat on the edge of his bed, heart racing, trying to catch his breath. He looked at the feather and whispered, "Magic or not, I think I believe you." He set it gently back in its box and crawled under his blanket, feeling both calm and curious. Whatever the forest wanted to teach him, he was ready to listen. But when morning came, Oscar would find a new surprise waiting. Proof that the forest's magic was very real indeed. Morning light crept into Oscar's room, soft and golden. The familiar smell of breakfast drifted through the house. Toast, jam, and a hint of his mother's favorite tea. But Oscar didn't wake slowly the way he usually did. His eyes opened all at once. He sat up quickly, remembering the feather, the glowing pond, and the frog's calm voice echoing in his mind. The pond has chosen you again. For a few seconds, he wondered if it had all been another dream. But when he turned to his desk, his breath caught. The feather was still glowing. It wasn't bright like before, just a soft, silvery shimmer, pulsing faintly as if it had its own heartbeat. The air around it felt warm and gentle, like a summer breeze. Oscar rubbed his eyes, then blinked again. "You're still glowing," he whispered. He reached out, but before he could touch it, something else caught his attention. The tadpoles were different. Biggie now had strong, tiny back legs and two front ones too. His tail had shrunk to half its size. He wasn't just swimming anymore. He was climbing. Smiley was following right behind, his back legs stretching and flexing. Even Froggy, the smallest, looked ready to begin his change. Oscar gasped, grinning from ear to ear. "You did it, Biggie. You're almost a frog." He dashed to his notebook, flipping to a new page. His pencil flew across the paper as he drew Biggie perching on a smooth rock, tiny legs tucked beneath him. Then he wrote in big, excited letters, "First frog sighting, proof that magic is real." His mother appeared at the doorway, holding a mug. "You're up early again," she said with a smile. "How are your little scientists doing today?" Oscar spun around, pointing to the tank. "Mom, look, Biggie's got front legs now." She came closer and bent down, eyes widening. "Well, would you look at that? He's almost ready to hop." "I know," Oscar said, and the feathers glowing again. She followed his gaze to the desk, then chuckled softly. "Still convinced it's magic, huh?" Oscar frowned playfully. "You don't see it glowing?" She tilted her head. "It looks pretty, sweetheart, but maybe it's just the sunlight." Oscar looked back at it. "No, He could tell the light was different, softer, coming from within. But he didn't argue. He just smiled. Maybe, he said quietly. After breakfast, Oscar carried the tank carefully into the backyard so the tadpoles could enjoy some sunlight. He placed it under the shade of the big oak tree, where the air was cool and the ground smelled of grass. He sat beside it with his sketchbook, watching Biggie climb onto a rock, blinking tiny eyes above the water surface, his chest filled with pride. He'd helped them grow, but something about the day felt special, like the world itself was quietly waiting for something. As he sat there, a gentle wind blew across the yard. The trees rustled, and the feather, still sitting in its box on his lap, lifted slightly, not floating this time, but swaying as if pointing towards something. Oscar followed its movement. The tip of the feather was angled toward the woods. He narrowed his eyes. "You want me to go back there, don't you?" The feather shimmered once, faintly, almost like it was nodding. Oscar's heart skipped. "All right," he whispered. "If the forest has more to show, I'll find it." He ran inside, told his mom he was going exploring again, and promised to be back before lunch. She smiled, waving him off with her usual advice. "Stay on the trail. Explorer." Oscar slipped on his vest, tucked the feather box into his pocket, and set off toward the woods. The world felt different now, brighter, more alive. The air shimmered with tiny motes of light that he hadn't noticed before. Maybe it was just the sun through the leaves, or maybe it was the same quiet magic from his dream. When he reached the line of oak trees marking the forest's edge, he paused, taking a deep breath. The path beyond was dappled with sunlight, full of secrets. He touched the feather through the pocket of his vest and whispered, "Let's see what you want to show me." Then, with steady steps, Oscar walked into the forest once more, ready for whatever waited beyond the trees. But this time, the forest would not be silent. Something or someone was waiting for him among the whispering leaves. Oscar stepped beneath the tall oaks, and the cool air wrapped around him like a whisper. Sunlight trickled through the leaves in golden specks, dancing across the ground as the breeze stirred the branches above. The forest seemed the same as before, but also somehow different. It wasn't just the light or the air. It was the feeling. The deeper he went, the more alive everything seemed. The leaves rustled not just from wind, but almost in rhythm, like they were murmuring softly to one another. The bird song rose and fell in patterns that felt like words, though Oscar couldn't understand them. "Hello," he called softly, his voice careful, as if afraid to disturb the stillness. No one answered, but then a faint chime, like a tiny bell, drifted through the air. Oscar stopped. What was that? The sound came again, clearer now. It wasn't a bell at all. It was the same musical tone he'd heard in his dream, the one that had come just before the glowing frog appeared. He reached into his vest and took out the small box holding the silver feather. It shimmered faintly, pulsing like it was alive. "All right," he said quietly. "I'm listening." The feather glowed a little brighter, and Oscar felt a tug, soft, like a pull of curiosity more than force, guiding him off the trail. He hesitated only for a second, then followed. Explorers, after all, had to go where the clues led. The undergrowth grew thicker, the air cooler. He ducked beneath low branches and stepped carefully over roots until the path opened into a small clearing he'd never seen before. At its center stood an old tree, its trunk broad and twisted, with deep lines etched into its bark like wrinkles on a wise old face. A small hollow opened near its roots, and the sunlight filtering through the canopy made it glow softly. Oscar's eyes widened. "You're beautiful," he whispered. The feather in his hand pulsed once more. He knelt beside the hollow and saw something glinting faintly inside. A reflection, pale and soft. He leaned closer and gasped. The inside of the hollow wasn't just dark wood. It shimmered like the surface of water, though no water was there. It looked like a tiny pond. He reached out carefully, his fingers trembling. The moment he touched the edge, the shimmer rippled outward like a raindrop in still water. And then, from the glow, a familiar figure appeared, the glowing frog. It sat calmly at the edge of the hollow, small and radiant, its eyes filled with gentle light. "Hello again, Oscar," the frog said softly. Oscar smiled, though he couldn't quite believe it. "You're real. You're actually real." The frog tilted its head. "Real is only a word for what we understand. Magic lives in what we haven't yet learned to see." Oscar nodded slowly. "You said the forest had something to teach me. Is this it?" The frog's eyes glimmered. "Part of it. You've shown care for the smallest creatures, the tadpoles you raised. You've seen how patience brings change. Now it's time to learn how everything in nature is connected." Oscar frowned slightly. "Connected?" The frog pointed its tiny front leg toward the trees around them. "Every leaf, every drop of water, every heartbeat in the forest speaks to the others. The feather you found belonged to a guardian of these woods, a spirit who watches and protects all living things. When you took it home, it reached out to you." Oscar looked down at the glowing feather in his hand. "So that's why it brought me here." "Yes," said the frog, "because you listen. Most people walk through the forest without hearing it breathe. But you notice." Oscar felt warmth in his chest, a quiet pride mixed with wonder. "So what do I do now?" The frog smiled. "Keep listening. Keep learning. There's more to see, more to protect. But for today, you must take the feather back to the pond. That's where it belongs." Oscar nodded slowly. "All right, I'll bring it back." The frog's light grew brighter, filling the hollow with a gentle glow. "And remember, Oscar, the magic you find in the forest is also the magic you carry inside." Then, just as before, the frog and the glow began to fade, leaving only the old tree and the quiet hum of the woods. Oscar stood there for a long time, the feather warm against his palm. The forest rustled softly around him, as if whispering its approval. He looked toward the direction of the pond and smiled. "All right, little frog, let's take it home." As Oscar made his way back toward the pond, he didn't know that returning the feather would awaken something even more extraordinary beneath the water surface. The walk back through the woods felt different this time. Oscar didn't hurry. He moved quietly, listening to every creak of branch and rustle of leaf, as though the forest were speaking directly to him. Sunlight streamed through the canopy in soft ribbons, and the silver feather in his hand glowed faintly with each step he took. When he reached the pond, the air felt cooler, almost sacred. The reeds swayed slowly in a circle, as if stirred by an invisible hand. Ripples spread across the water, even though no breeze touched it. Oscar knelt at the edge, his knees pressing into the soft earth. "I brought it back," he said softly, holding out the feather. The pond shimmered in response. Rings of light spread outward, and the reflection of the sky above began to change. The blue deepened, glowing with silvery lines that moved like threads weaving across the surface. Oscar's breath caught. Then, from the center of the pond, the glowing frog appeared again, brighter and calmer than ever. But this time, it wasn't alone. Behind it, rising from the water, came something larger, a shape made of light and color. At first, Oscar thought it was another reflection, but then he realized it was a bird, vast and graceful, with wings made of liquid silver and eyes like morning dew. Its feathers rippled with every shade of blue and green, like a rainbow reflected on water. The guardian. The frog's gentle voice echoed through the clearing. "Oscar the explorer," it said, "you have done what few remember to do. You listened." The great bird dipped its head low, its eyes kind and wise. "The forest thanks you." A voice rang out, soft but powerful, like wind through the trees. "You cared for its smallest creatures and treated its wonders with respect. That is what makes an explorer worthy." Oscar stared wide-eyed. "Are you real?" he whispered. The bird's feathers shimmered, as real as the song of the river or the whisper of the leaves. "We exist when someone believes enough to see us." Oscar's heart thumped. "And the feather, it was yours?" The guardian nodded. "A gift that finds those who see with both their eyes and their hearts. You followed its light, and because of that, the balance of this pond, this forest, remains strong." Oscar looked down at Biggie, Smalley, and Froggy's tank he'd brought along in his pack. The tadpoles had grown strong and lively, two of them nearly frogs now. The frog on the pond smiled. "It is time to return them home." Oscar smiled back and carefully lowered the small tank into the shallows. He tilted it gently until the tadpoles slipped into the pond. For a moment, they swam in circles near his hands, as if saying goodbye before darting into the reeds. "Good luck, Biggie, Smally, Froggy," he whispered. "See you soon." The guardian's wings shimmered, sending ripples of light across the pond. "You have learned the heart of exploring," it said, "to see, to care, and to protect." Oscar felt warmth spreading through his chest, a quiet, glowing pride. "Will I see you again?" he asked softly. The frog's eyes twinkled. "Whenever you listen." The great bird spread its wings, and a gust of wind swept through the clearing, scattering leaves like sparks. The pond blazed with light one last time, and then, slowly, both figures faded into silver mist. The ripples stilled. The woods grew quiet once more. Oscar stayed there for a while, staring at the pond, letting the peaceful silence settle around him. When he finally stood up, the feather in his hand had lost its glow, returning to its natural silver shimmer. But it didn't feel empty. It felt alive, as if it held the memory of everything he'd just seen. He tucked it safely into his vest pocket, smiling to himself. "Thank you," he whispered, as he walked back toward home. The trees swayed gently, almost as though they were waving farewell. The sunlight glittered through the branches, and a single hawk soared high above, circling silently in the sky. By the time Oscar reached the edge of the woods, he felt lighter, different somehow. The world around him was still the same, but he saw it with new eyes. Every leaf seemed brighter, every sound more alive. When he stepped onto the path toward home, he knew that being an explorer wasn't just about discovering new things. It was about listening, caring, and protecting the magic that was already there. He smiled. "Once an explorer," he said softly, "always an explorer." The wind rustled the trees in agreement. And far behind him, deep in the heart of the pond, 3 tiny frogs leapt joyfully into the reeds. Home at last. Because every ending to an explorer's adventure is only the beginning of another.